The second name on the seating chart was Heather. That was the first problem. Not because there was anything wrong with Heather. There wasn't. There hadn't been for 3 years until there suddenly was, and then there were 11 months of silence so complete I'd sometimes wonder if I'd imagined the whole friendship. The wedding was my college roommate Ben's. He'd been dating Sophie since junior year, and everyone who knew them had been waiting on this invitation for about as long as they'd been together. I got mine in February, RSVP by March. Ceremony in June, Riverside, Wisconsin, at some barn venue his family had rented out on a lake. I said yes without thinking twice. I'd known Ben since we were 18 and sharing a 12 by 12 room with 2 twin beds and 1 functional outlet. What I didn't think about, not until I was already confirmed and had booked a non-refundable flight, was that Heather would be there too. Of course she would be. She'd been friends with Sophie since high school. Of course she was on the guest list. Of course she'd RSVP'd yes. And of course Ben, who knew everything that had happened between us and had somehow managed to stay friends with both of us, without taking sides, put us at the same table. I found out 2 weeks before the wedding when Sophie posted the seating chart graphic on Instagram. I stared at it for a long time. Table 7, my name on the left side, hers on the right, 4 other names between us that didn't matter. I thought about texting Ben. I thought about it seriously. I typed out the message twice and deleted it twice, because what was I going to say? Hey, can you reseat me? Because I've been avoiding my former best friend for almost a year, and I'm not emotionally prepared to sit across from her for 3 hours? That wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, and it wasn't fair to put Ben in the middle of it, not on his wedding week. So I didn't say anything. I flew into Milwaukee on a Friday afternoon, rented a car, and drove the 40 minutes north to the lake town where the venue was. The rehearsal dinner was that night. I wasn't in the wedding party, so I wasn't required to go. But Ben had texted me saying it was open to close friends and I should come. I almost didn't. I sat in my hotel room for 20 minutes in my jacket, keys in hand, telling myself I was being ridiculous. We were adults. It had been 11 months. Whatever had happened between Heather and me, we could be civil for a weekend. I went. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant attached to the hotel. One of those places with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a menu that calls a cheeseburger an artisan beef patty. I spotted Ben immediately. He was the one surrounded by 8 people near the bar, laughing louder than everyone else. I made my way over, said the things you say at rehearsal dinners, hugged Sophie, told her she looked amazing, which she did. And then I turned around and Heather was standing 4 feet away from me, holding a glass of white wine, talking to someone I didn't recognize. She hadn't seen me yet. I had about 3 seconds to decide whether to walk toward her or find somewhere else to be. I used all 3 of them, standing completely still, which meant I wasn't walking anywhere, which meant she turned and saw me before I'd made any decision at all. There was a pause. Not a long one, maybe 2 seconds, but I felt it like it lasted considerably longer. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that isn't quite a smile. Polite. Careful. The smile you give to someone you used to know and aren't sure how to be around anymore. Hey, she said. Hey, I said back, and that was it. Someone pulled her into another conversation, and I drifted toward the bar and ordered a beer and spent the next 2 hours being perfectly friendly with everyone, except the one person I'd once told everything to. We sat at the same table for dinner that night too. Not the same 2 feet of space between us, proximity we'd have the next evening, but close enough that I could hear her laugh at something someone else said and feel something in my chest that I didn't have a good word for. Here's the thing about Heather. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party when we were both 26. I was working in sales for a logistics company, which sounds boring because it was. She was doing graphic design for a mid-size marketing firm downtown. We ended up standing next to the same cooler for about 45 minutes, talking about nothing. Some TV show we'd both been watching, the traffic in the city, whether the appetizers were worth the trip across the room. By the end of the night, I had her number. Not in a romantic way, or not only in a romantic way, which was the complicated part I was never entirely honest with myself about. Mostly, it felt like I'd met someone who thought the same way I did about things. That specific kind of click that doesn't happen all the time, and you recognize it when it does. We became the kind of friends who texted every day, who called each other when something happened, good or bad, before calling anyone else. She came to my cousin's wedding with me because I didn't want to show up alone and didn't feel like explaining why. I helped her move twice, including once across 3 flights of stairs in August. We had a standing Saturday morning thing at this diner near her apartment, booth in the back, same orders every time, same conversation that would somehow always find new material. I thought about dating her, obviously. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But we'd settled into something comfortable enough that I was afraid to mess with the shape of it. And I'd told myself somewhere along the way that if she'd wanted it to be something else, she would have said so. She was direct about everything else. She would have said so. So I didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and we just kept being what we were for almost 3 years. Then came the night in July, about a year before Ben's wedding. We were out with a group, 6 of us, some bar in the neighborhood, the kind of night that starts at 8 and somehow it's midnight before anyone's checked their phone. Heather and I had been sitting together most of the evening. At some point, I went to get another round, and when I came back, she was talking to this guy I didn't know. Tall, good-looking, the kind of easy confidence that I've always slightly resented in other men. I set down the drinks, and someone pulled me into another conversation. I kept noticing them, though, the way she was laughing, the way he was leaning in. At some point, I looked over, and they were exchanging phones, and I understood exactly what was happening. I told myself it didn't matter. We were friends. This was a normal thing for friends to watch happen. I finished my drink and said I had an early morning and left. I did not have an early morning. She texted me the next day. Hey, did you leave? Didn't even see you go. I told her I had to be up early. She asked how my morning was. I answered in 2 words. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. And then, because I was apparently 26 in terms of emotional maturity, despite being 31, I just pulled back. Slowly at first, then more completely. Answered texts a little later. Canceled plans once, then twice, with reasons that were technically true, but not really the reason. Stopped initiating. Told myself I was protecting something, though I couldn't have told you exactly what. She pushed back for a while. She asked me directly, twice, if something was wrong. The first time I said no, everything was fine, just busy with work. The second time she asked, she said, and I remember this exactly, you've been weird for like 2 months. Just tell me what's going on. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, which was the most cowardly thing I could have possibly said. Because I did know. I knew exactly. I just didn't want to say it out loud, because saying it out loud meant admitting something that I'd been careful not to admit, which was that I'd been in love with her for probably 2.5 of those 3 years and had done absolutely nothing about it. So I lied, and she went quiet after that. And within a few weeks, the daily texts had stopped, and the Saturday mornings had stopped, and we were down to the kind of occasional check-in that people do when they used to be close and aren't sure how to close the distance. And then even that stopped. 11 months, I counted later. 11 months where the closest thing to contact was a birthday message she left on my Instagram post in March, the emoji kind, no words, that I liked and didn't respond to. I thought about reaching out probably 30 times. I'd start typing and stop. I told myself the same thing every time, which is that the longer I waited, the more it would seem like the silence had been about something serious. And I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to have that conversation. I didn't want to sit across from her and say, I watched you give your number to someone at a bar, and I went home and felt sorry for myself for 11 months. Because I was too afraid to tell you that I wanted to be the one you were giving your number to. So I didn't. I just waited, for reasons I still can't fully justify, for something to force the issue. Turns out, a mutual friend's wedding in June was going to be that thing. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon, outside by the lake, with white chairs and string lights and a Midwest June that had decided, out of pure generosity, to be 72 degrees and sunny. Ben looked like someone had told him the best news of his life. Sophie looked like she already knew it. I cried a little during the vows, which I'm not embarrassed about, and the guy next to me cried more than I did, which helped. The reception was in the barn, which had been converted beautifully, all warm wood and candlelight, and a band that actually knew how to read a room. I found my seat. Table 7. I sat down and introduced myself to the 2 people I didn't know, and made the small talk you make and waited. She came in about 10 minutes later. Heather at a wedding looked like Heather at any other situation. unself-consciously herself. Dark green dress, hair pulled back, the same earrings she'd been wearing the first night I met her, which I noticed and immediately felt like an idiot for noticing. She found the table, checked the name cards, looked up and found me. This time there wasn't even the polite smile, just a look. And then she sat down in the seat diagonal from mine and introduced herself to the people on her side of the table, and I introduced myself to the people on my side, and we began the extremely civilized process of being at the same event without talking to each other. We were good at it by then. We'd had practice. The problem was that it was a small table, and the people on either side of us were couples, and the natural shape of the conversation kept narrowing until it was basically just the two of us at the center of it. Someone would say something, and it would land between us, and one of us would respond, and then the other. And then we were talking not exactly by choice, just by the logic of the seating chart and the wine and the fact that we'd once been very good at talking to each other. She asked me how work was going. I told her I'd switched companies, moved into operations management. She seemed genuinely interested. She'd told me she'd gone freelance 6 months ago. I said I'd heard, through Ben. She nodded. There was a pause. "This is weird," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We're being very normal about how weird this is. I think that's the only way to get through it." She looked at me for a second. Then she looked down at her water glass. "How long has it been?" I knew the number already. 11 months. That's almost a year. "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. And it wasn't exactly agreement, more like acknowledgement, like she was filing the number away. The dinner came. The toasts happened. Ben's best man gave a speech that was 90% embarrassing Ben stories and 10% actual emotion, perfectly calibrated. Sophie's maid of honor cried through the whole thing and made everyone else cry too. I looked over at one point, and Heather was laughing at something the best man had said, and I thought with a sudden and unwelcome clarity that I had genuinely missed her. Not in the distant way I'd told myself I had. In the specific way where you realize that someone's laugh is something you forgot you missed. I looked away. The band started around 8. The first dance was a song I didn't know, but that clearly meant something to Ben and Sophie, because they both looked like they were having a private conversation while standing in the middle of a room full of people. Then the floor opened up and the tables started thinning out. I was on my third drink, watching the dancing, when Heather appeared next to me. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to actually answer." I turned to look at her. "Okay, what happened with us?" There it was. 11 months of avoidance, and she was asking me directly, in the middle of Ben's wedding reception, with the band playing something upbeat, and the floor full of people and no reasonable exit. I thought about deflecting. I thought about it for about 4 seconds, and then I let it go, because I was tired. I was genuinely tired of the version of this story I'd been telling myself, the one where I was protecting something instead of just being afraid. "I watched you exchange numbers with some guy at that bar last July," I said, "and I left, and I told myself I was fine, and then it turned out I wasn't, and I handled it by disappearing instead of talking to you, which, looking back on it, was maybe not my most mature move." She was quiet for a moment. "That guy," she said. "From that bar? Yeah, I went on one date with him. It was terrible. He talked about himself for 2 hours straight and ordered for me without asking. I didn't say anything. I texted you the next day," she said. "I was going to tell you about it." "That's actually what I was texting you about when you started being weird." I processed that for a second. "So," I said slowly, "I spent 11 months avoiding you because I was upset about something that lasted one date and went nowhere. Apparently." I looked at the ceiling briefly. That is a remarkable amount of wasted time. It really is. "In my defense," I started. "I'm going to need a very good defense." "I don't have one," I said. "I have a terrible one." "You want to hear it anyway?" She crossed her arms. "I'm listening." I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure what to say. And I kept not saying anything until it felt like too much time had passed to say anything. And then it was almost a year and saying nothing had become the whole shape of it. "That's the terrible defense? Told you." She was quiet for a moment. The band shifted into something slower, and the crowd on the dance floor changed shape around us. "You know what I kept thinking?" she said. "I kept thinking I must have done something wrong. Something I said or didn't say. I replayed every conversation from the weeks before you went quiet. I went back through texts trying to figure out what I'd missed. I hadn't known that. I'd assumed, I don't know what I'd assumed, that she'd moved on without much friction. That the friendship had mattered less to her than it had to me. You didn't do anything, I said. That's the whole stupid truth of it. You did nothing wrong. I just couldn't figure out how to be around you without saying something I was afraid to say, so I chose option C, which was to disappear entirely and let 11 months go by. What were you afraid to say? I looked at her. Come on, she said, and her voice was a little quieter now. We're at a wedding. We've been at the same table for 3 hours. I think we're past the point where you get to be vague about it. The band was playing something gentle, and I was standing next to the person I'd been avoiding for almost a year, and there was genuinely nowhere left to hide. I didn't want to watch you date someone else and pretend it didn't bother me, I said, because it bothered me. It had been bothering me for a long time before that. Actually, I just used that night as the excuse to finally fall apart about it, which is, I'm aware, completely backwards. She looked at me steadily. How long is a long time? Longer than I want to say out loud right now. At least give me a ballpark. Maybe most of the time we were friends. The silence that followed was not the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that means someone is thinking. So let me make sure I have this straight, she said finally. You had feelings for me for most of our friendship. You never said anything. I gave my number to a guy at a bar who turned out to be a complete dud. You decided that was the moment to stop talking to me entirely. For 11 months. When you say it like that, I'm saying it like that because that's what happened. Yeah, I said. That's what happened. She laughed. Not the polite kind from the night before, the real kind, the one I'd missed. You're a mess, she said. I know. I've been confused about what I did wrong for 11 months. I know. I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry about that part. You should be. I am. She was quiet for a moment. You know I would have wanted to know, she said. What you were thinking. Before all of this. Yeah. She looked at the dance floor. I think I would have had things to say about it. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. Good things or bad things? I don't know yet, she said. I think I need about 10 minutes to process the information that you've apparently been quietly in love with me for 3 years while I was sitting across from you at the same diner every Saturday. That's a fair amount of processing time. Thank you. She turned to look at me. But for the record, and I mean this, the next time you're feeling something and decide the best course of action is to just stop talking to me, I'm going to need you to not do that. Yeah, I said. Noted. Because that was a long 11 months. It was, I said. For me too. She nodded. Then she held out her hand. Not for a handshake, just palm up, an offering of something. I took it. We stood there for a while like that, watching Ben and Sophie dance, not saying much, and it was the closest thing to comfortable I'd felt in almost a year. At some point she turned to me and said quietly, "So you're not done with me?" And I said, "I was never done with you. I was just afraid of you." She considered that. "Okay," she said, "that's a start." We talked until the bar closed, and the lights came up, and the catering staff started quietly stacking chairs around us. We talked through things I'd been carrying for 3 years and things she'd been trying to figure out for 11 months. We talked the way we used to at that booth in the back of the diner, the conversation that always found more material. I drove her back to the hotel. In the parking lot before she got out, she said, "I'm glad Ben put us at the same table." "I'm going to tell him that," I said. "He will be insufferable about it," she laughed. "He should be. He earned it." There was a pause. Not the loaded kind from the rehearsal dinner, not the careful kind from across a table. Just a pause. "Same diner?" she said. "When we're both back. Same booth," I said. She smiled. The real one, the one I'd known for 3 years and spent 11 months missing without fully admitting I was missing it, and got out of the car. I sat there for a minute after the door closed. June night, parking lot, string lights, still glowing through the barn windows in the distance. I thought about all the Saturdays I'd skipped, all the texts I'd started typing and deleted, all the mornings I'd told myself the silence was fine, that it would pass, that I was being practical about something that couldn't go anywhere. I'd been an idiot, an 11-month, fully committed, industrially scaled idiot. But she'd said same diner, and I'd said same booth, and I figured that was probably enough of a start.